Hey everybody, Russ at Shaper here, and you're about to watch our session on building curved drawer boxes with Origin and Studio. What is a curved drawer box? It's one of these funny things. We use this with a pivot hinge to add a fun interaction to the next piece of furniture that you're going to build. Now, this is an advanced show. There's going to be a lot of Studio that we're going to go through. You're going to learn a lot. We're going to cut all of this stuff out with Origin, and then we're going to assemble it at the end, and we'll end up with a fun box-jointed panel with a rabbit like this. Stacked lamination, technical term. There might be a lot of questions. I hope that you ask them in the comments below. I also hope that you like and subscribe to this video and our channel. And what I really hope is that you join us live for Shaper Sessions every other Thursday at shapertools.com/sessions. That's at 4 o'clock Pacific, and not only are you going to get this show, but you get the live Q&A at the end. We always do giveaways. We've got a great community, and we hope to see you there. Without any further ado, on to the show. Hey everybody, Russ here from Shaper Tools, and you're tuned in to Shaper Sessions. That's right, Jake's on vacation, so it's just me today, and so we are throwing all the rules out the window. Are you ready for a super nerdy show? You're tuned into the right place. Are you ready to see me cut on Origin for the first time in ages? This is the right show for you. Have you ever wanted to make a 3-sided drawer box? Wait, what the heck is that? That's what we're doing today. We're working on curved drawer boxes, and these are a lot of fun because they add a really cool interaction to your cabinets. So we've been working on this wall-hanging cabinet with Phil Morley. This is a piece of his that we're designing, fine-tuning for Origin. And check out this side drawer on the left-hand side over here. Isn't that something? Is it a cabinet door? Is it a drawer? We're going to stick this thing right in the back here, and it's going to look really sweet when it pulls out. But these are really complicated to make, so we're going to go through the whole process of this using Studio and Origin today. And since it's really hard to talk by yourself for an hour, we're going to try to keep it concise, but I hope that you ask a lot of questions so that we can answer those in the Q&A. Speaking of the Q&A, for anybody who's new to Shaper Sessions, this is a live show, so we've got a chat going on the side of your screen. We've got Ted in the chat. He's going to answer as many questions as he can about the Shaper system, about Origin, about Studio, about the project that we're working on. But invariably, there are going to be some really meaty questions in there, and so Ted's going to send those to me to answer at the end of the show. So make sure you drop those questions in that chat box. Also, at the end of the show, we're doing a giveaway. You may have noticed this drawer/door, this pivoting drawer, is hung on a really nice pair of Brusso L23 hinges. So we linked up with the guys at Brusso. We're giving away a pair of those L23 hinges today. They're awesome. They're the most beautiful hinges made in the States. Smooth cutting, smooth pivoting, smooth cutting with Origin with the hardware catalog. And then on top of that, we're going to give away something from the Shaper accessory catalog. We usually decide that toward the end of the show, once we see what we've used. This is going to be a heady one, so I reiterate, please ask questions. We'll get to those at the end of the show. And thanks for tagging along with me. Without further ado, let's talk a little bit about what this 3-sided curved drawer box is, how it's constructed, and then we'll go into cutting some things because we know it takes a little while for people to log into the show. We'll cut a little bit and then dive back into the details. So, curved drawer box. This is a really interesting one because there's so many ways to make this curve, but so few ways to actually get it bang on perfectly accurate. We tried doing one of these with the bent lamination, but the spring back, when I took it out of the mold, had this opening up enough that it didn't really want to close when I tried to join this together with the box joints. The next thing that I tried was a stacked lamination where I cut a bunch of shapes in this curve with Origin and stacked them together using dowels to locate them, then cut the box joints after the fact. This worked great up until then, but then when I went to cut the groove for the bottom of the box on the router table, I had something pretty disastrous happen. And this is because our grain was going from this long direction off sideways over here. And that's no fun. Let's show this off on this side camera over here. I mean, look at that. It was an exciting day. So I thought, okay, third time's the charm. What we're going to do is take this stacked lamination concept, tune it so that the stacked laminations are exactly the size of the fingers of our box joint. And that's going to allow us to actually cut the groove or rabbet in the base of this box while we're cutting that stacked finger with Origin. So we're going to make 3 different parts today. We're going to make long fingers, we're going to make short fingers, and then we're going to make one special long finger that has that rabbet included in the bottom of the box. And I've done a lot of this before the show. So let's take a look on the overhead camera over here on this board that I've got laid out. There are 7 pieces total, so if you look at this panel of the drawer, you can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 fingers. And so we've got 4 long fingers. If we look at the curved side now, we've got 4 long fingers, 3 short fingers, and one of these long fingers needs to have that groove for the base of the box. I've cut 5 of these so far. I've got 1, 2, 3 long fingers, something like that. I might have made a mistake actually on how many I cut, so we can revisit that and make sure we've got the right number. I've got a couple of short fingers. Oh no, here, these are the long ones. These are the short ones. It's actually really hard to tell when these are just floating on their own, but when we put it together, it's all going to make sense. If we go over to Origin here, you can see what's been cut. If I zoom out here, long, short, long, short, long, short, long. So we've got 2 left to cut. This one's going to be the very top of the stacked lamination. You can see that it's reversed here. It's because I designed all of this from the top down, so one of these has to be reversed so that you can get the blind holes facing the right direction. Again, a lot of this might make more sense once these are all cut out and we get to assembling these. But why don't we go ahead and cut this out? That'll get us through just seeing what's going on with Origin as we cut through the process of this first one. We'll come back later in the show, cut the more difficult side with the groove included, and in between we'll do some studio design, and that's guaranteed to teach you something. So back on Origin here, and I'm going to sit down because we're settling in here for a little bit of cutting. We've got 2 different paths or path types going on. We've got this outside profile of the stack lamination, and then we have a series of holes. Now, a couple things to note for the 5 that I've cut in advance, the holes and the outside cut, those are going all the way through. But since this is the top, I don't want people to necessarily see how I've constructed this box. I do want to make sure that these holes that I cut first do not go all the way through the thickness of the lamination. The thickness of these is 0.415 inches, so I'm going to cut this down to 0.375. Again, when we cut that last piece, we'll go through all the settings in super granular detail. But for now, I'm just going to go ahead and helix 4 holes, and then we'll check back in before I cut the outside profile. Pretty easy. Now, let's come back and look at this outer profile here. One thing that I'm going to reiterate during this show that I want you guys to pay attention to is the direction of the grain in this piece of wood. This is going across this way, so when we come to a corner like this corner up here, we've got a really strong grain coming all the way to this corner. Same on the other side. We have really strong grain in this corner. But right here, this grain is about as close to cutting across the grain as you can get. These are prone to chipping, so before I cut all the way through this, I'm just going to relieve the cut on this corner while the whole thing is supported by going all the way down to a little deeper than final depth. I'll go to 0.43 because this is a 0.415 inch piece. Outside cut, 0 offset. I'm going to just touch this corner and the other one. Okay, now we've got this set to an outside cut. That's perfect. I'm going to cut this outside pass of this part in 2 steps. I'm going to rough it most of the way through to 0.03 inches, and I will cut that using auto pass to 0.375 inches because I don't want to go all the way through yet, in 2 steps. And then I'll come back and cut the whole thing out with a finishing pass all the way to the final depth. What that does is it allows me to do a finishing pass all the way around the part while the part is fully supported and connected to the rest of my workpiece so that it doesn't break free before I expect it to. So let's do these 2 auto pass passes and then we'll transition right into that finishing cut. There we go. Now, again, the nice part of that technique is that you get that whole finishing pass while that part is still completely connected to your base material. So you get really good cut quality all the way around. And you can see when we look at these sharp corners here, let's do this on the origin cam because this is a really small detail. This is that corner where that grain's going across that way. And so just by relieving that corner a little bit before we cut it, you get really perfectly crisp corners without any tear out on these corners, which I got on the first box. So ask me how I know. Now, okay, we're looking at all these parts. There are 3 different parts on here. The real meat of the question of this drawer box is how the heck do we design something like this? It's a little more complicated than you would want to do just on the tool itself. So we're about to dive into Studio. And again, like I said, this is a heady show, so please ask a lot of questions. We'll answer as many as we can in the Q&A. And if you're watching this later on YouTube, please join us live on our next Shaper session. But if you're watching this on YouTube and all you can do is leave a comment, please leave a comment on YouTube and we'll answer that as best we can. Reminding everybody, if you just signed on, we're making this curved drawer box. It's a really fun part that is pretty complicated to make. Who's ever seen a drawer box with 3 sides? So let's pop over to the computer and look at what we're making. Here's an example of the type of file that we're trying to get at the end of the day. This is the part that we'll cut toward the end of the show. This is that bottom long-fingered stacked laminated part with the rabbet included in it, and you can see these holes that I've got included here for locating the parts as we stack them against each other. If you go and look at what I've designed before the show by opening recent, we've got a base. That's kind of obvious. You need a base, but it also has to have this curved edge to it. We've got this long groove file that we're looking at. We can see the difference between that and the long-fingered stacked laminated part, which is exactly the same. It just doesn't have that rabbit cut out in it. And then we also have a fourth file, which is the short finger section, the interior of those box joints. And you can see how this doesn't include that square over here and that square over here. This one's just a little bit shorter. Holes are still in the same place. The arcs are of the same radius. These are both ellipses. So we're going to make 4 total files altogether, and let's start from scratch. We're going to make a new design. I'm going to give it a title. You always want to give these a title because invariably you're going to lose stuff. So let's call this Shaper Sessions Curved Box. Nice. A couple things that I want to double check before I get started. These are all in the Design tab. These are things that I learned that you're just going to want to have checked before you start. We're going to use Smart Alignment. We're going to use Position. We're going to use a grid of 3/8 of an inch. And the reason that we're using 3/8 of an inch is because that's the thickness of the stock that we're using for the 2 flat sides of the box. And then we're also going to turn on Snap to Grid. The origin anchor is not important for this. Position labels aren't important for this, so we can ignore those and leave them off. I'm also working in inches today, but you can very easily work in millimeters. Now, the very first thing that you need to decide is what size is your drawer going to be. So I made the sides of my drawer first, and we're going to model those with rectangles. Let's do the long side of the drawer. This one is 7.75 inches wide. And like I said, everything is 3/8 of an inch thick. So we can hit that. This button up here lets me recenter and zoom to my selection. I really like that. Now here's the trick. This is what's going to make the whole thing work. I'm going to drag this, snapping all the way around. This right here, where the 2 solid lines intersect, this is your 0, 0 point. You want to place this part with the corner 1 material thickness down and to the right of that 0, 0 point. And we're going to do the same thing for the vertical edge of the box. So let's make another rectangle. This one I know is, again, 0.375 inches thick. Now that's going to be the width because this one's going the other direction. And 5¼ inches tall. And with this, I'm going to do the exact same thing where I snap it inside there. Now, why, you might ask, do we put these on the outside of the origin point instead of on the inside or something like that? Well, that's because we want the maximum width and height of the ellipse to line up with the inside of this point and the inside of this point here, which aligns to our x-axis and our y-axis. So speaking of that, let's go ahead and make that ellipse. First one, I can drag this to 0, 0, and then just drag this to match that height, and drag this out to match this height. Now, it doesn't matter exactly what these dimensions are. It turns out that they're 14.75 inches wide and 9.75 inches tall. That's great, but really, all we need to know has been defined by the 2 sides of our box that we've already made. Okay, so this is the outer bound of our stacked lamination. This is the outside of the curve of the box. For the rest of these, instead of making more ellipses, I really just like copying the ellipse that I already made using the duplicate in place option. And this is going to let me scale another ellipse around this exact same center point. So all of my material is going to be 0.375 inches thick. There are 2 sides of this ellipse, so we're going to double that, minus 3/4 of an inch. So that went from 14.75 down to 14 flat in the width, and we're going to do the same thing in the height, 9.75 down to 9 inches flat in the height. And this is starting to look an awful lot more like a drawer box, except we've got one little wonky thing going on down here, these curves. But you can see how we've got a part on the side here, a panel here, that's overlapping with a box joint on this end, and we've got a panel down here that's overlapping with a box joint on this end and on this end. Now, the next thing that we need to do is square off the corners of this ellipse, because we don't want a box joint on the ellipse that comes in like this at the end. We want that to be nice and square to meet with the panel. So I'll just make a nice little square here. This will be 0.375 in width and in height, because everything that we're working with today is 3/8. We're going to snap this here. This is going to let me shape shift this nice square shape onto the end of my stacked lamination over there. And we'll do the same thing up here. Let's make another rectangle. That's 0.375 by 0.375. Great. Okay. So we've got that. Now, you can see if I take a break here and go into Shapeshifter by selecting all, going into Shapeshifter, you can see that I could go ahead and pick the shape for these big and small jointed boxes. Okay, that's half the battle. The second half of the battle here is going to be adding the locating holes. We need 1, 2, 3, 4, I think, at least maybe 5, but we'll go with 4 today. And we need to add the rabbet down here. So let's add the rabbet first, because that's going to define the amount of room that I have left for those locating pins. Oop. Control Z to put that back. Now, I know that I want my rabbet to be 3/32 of an inch deep. That's really just because we don't have that much room. I would make it bigger if I could, but we've got to have room for those locating dowels. So I'm going to take this smaller ellipse, duplicate it again. Remember, this is defining the inside curve of that box shape. Again, we've got 2 sides of the box here, so we have to multiply the change that we want times 2. I'll add 3/16 to the width, and I'll add 3/16 to the height. Don't forget the plus sign. There we go. There's our rabbet shape. That's great. We do want to terminate that down here, so let's go ahead and add another little square down here that we can bring down to give us a cutoff line, 0.1875, half of that 0.375, so that's going to be able to cut our rabbet off before we get all the way to the end of that box joint. And let's do the same thing up at the top. Once again, I really love this duplicate in place button. Let's change the anchor point here so that it moves from the side opposite where the anchor point is. So you can see this is how that adjustment works right there. If you left that anchor point on the center, you'd be operating both sides of the width at the same time. Okay, now we can get that rabbet. Now let's just drop a couple of circles on there. Now, these are fun because these don't actually really need to be aligned to anything in particular. They just need to all be in the same place as you stack all 7 of these parts together. So we can make a circle. I do know that my material for this is 3/16 or 0.1875 inches. And I can just place this wherever it feels good. You can use those arrow keys, up, down, left, right, to nudge this circle around. Duplicate that. Let's move this one down over here. Want that roughly centered in the stock that's going to be left over after the rabbet. I'm using just pinch to zoom here on my laptop trackpad. Love the trackpad. Feels so modern. Who was around pre-trackpad? Drop a note in the comments. I was, but just barely. All right, duplicate again. And then let's drop another one of these down here. Sneaking it up to right in the middle where I want it. Now you'll notice, let's zoom to the whole thing, not just that circle. You'll notice that these are actually all over the place, and it totally doesn't matter at all. Because as long as all of these parts are stacked on top of each other the same way, then all the circles are going to line up, but just for the sake of my neuroticism, I am going to drag this one over to line it up a little more evenly between the other three. Yeah, there we go. Okay, nice. Wow, that's all of the shapes that we need to do all of the shape shifting that we need to do to get this box. Now, we do have to break these out into 4 separate files. So we've done this before. My favorite way to do this is by going into duplicate design. So I'm going to do this as if it were a save as. So we're going to call this Shaper Sessions curved box. Oh, that's getting really verbose. So let's call this Shaper Sessions short section. Oh man, that's a mouthful. We'll call it short finger because we're doing finger joints. We'll do the short one first. This is the easiest one. So we'll rename this duplicate. You'll notice that if I go into my recent designs, now I have 2 that are exactly the same. So this is my base design, and this is my save as that I'm working in right now. Okay, let's just hit Control A to select everything and go into Shapeshifter. I want just that short finger plus the rabbit. There we go. That's the entire depth, 0.375 of this bent laminated part or stacked laminated part, but I'm not including the fingers at the right and at the left. I am including the holes. I'm gonna make this a shape. Actually, let's do this in 2 steps. Let's get just the outside profile, and then we'll grab the holes second. So we're gonna make just this outside profile, make that shape. Now let's Control A, select everything, shapeshift again, and now we'll just get the holes and turn those into a second shape. And you'll see why in just a moment. Ooh. Don't forget to keep the rest of your shapes. Shapeshift, I'm going to select the holes, and we are still going to keep existing shapes. Nice, there we go, make shape. Now we have a bunch of extra stuff on here. I'm going to click and drag to pick the things that I don't want. Let's get rid of that stuff. Let's get rid of this stuff. Oh, not that stuff. I may have shapeshifted something accidentally. Okay, let's try this one more time. We're doing the shapeshift. Control A. Shapeshift. We're picking these 2 guys. We're making that shape. Nice. Making the shape. Okay, that looks good. But don't forget to keep your parts. You know what? I'm going to do this the way that I did it the first time. And just do this with the holes. This is so much easier. I was trying to do this in 2 separate parts, but I don't know why. So here's our part with the holes. Now, the one thing that I do want to do is make the holes a separate part. So we're going to shapeshift out just the holes here. Make those their own shape. And now once again, I can take this part, shapeshift it, and select everything and make that a shape. So now I've got 2 different shapes. I've got this base finger, and I've got the holes. The reason that I want to separate those out is because when I go into plan mode, I want these to be separate shapes so that they're treated independently when I set them as outside and inside cuts. This outline we're going to make as an outside cut. The 4 circles we'll make as inside cuts. And because all of these fingers are on the inside, I can set the depth of everything to 0.43 inches because all of these are going all the way through. Great, that's one. We can review it. That looks realistic. Now let's go on to the next. We're going back to our base file here in design mode. Let's duplicate this design again. Let's call this one Shaper Sessions Long Finger. Okay, one more, shapeshift. Now on this one, we're going to zoom in because we want all this long finger stuff over here. We're going to get those little slivers even. There we go. And same up at the top. There we go. Tiny little sliver up there, but we want to grab it. There we go, got both of those. And all of that. Making that a shape. Zoom to fit. Now let's do the same thing that we did with shape-shifting the circles and the base shape to make those two separate parts. Let me show you the reason why I'm doing that. If we go over to plan mode as it is right now, if I change this whole thing to an outside cut, it's making these inside holes outside cuts also because it's treating this whole thing as one compound shape. This is kind of a interesting artifact of digital design. So we do want to be able to treat these circles separately from the outside shape. Let's do that shape shifting again. Okay, Control A, shapeshifter, picking out the 4 holes. Keep existing shapes, make shape. Now with that base shape, shapeshifter, select all. We're going to take all of that stuff, make that a shape. Again, back in plan. Outside cut for that one. Inside cut for these holes. Very nice. Now for the 4 holes, what I want to do, because I don't want to accidentally go too deep on the one that's the top of my box, I will make these all set to 0.375. You can always override that on origin, but it's nice to have the warning. But you do want to cut all the way through on the depth, so that'll be 0.415 or 0.3 to make sure that you go all the way through. Review mode on that. Looks good. Now we're going to graduate to the rabbit. We're going to add even more into this shape shifting. Let's go back to open recent, back to our base file, back to the design. Okay, now we're going to shapeshift all this, including that rabbit. So we're going to select all, shapeshift, zooming in. First thing I'm going to pick is just the rabbit itself. Keep all the existing shapes, make that shape. Okay, next thing I'm going to pick is everything including the rabbit. There we go, zooming out. Picking up here. Gotta make sure to get that little sliver. Perfect. Everything including the rabbit. Let's make that a shape. And we'll keep those existing shapes also. Now let's get rid of some extra stuff. Recenter all this, get rid of that guy, get rid of that guy, get rid of that guy. This looks close. Now the issue with this is that we have one big outside shape and one little shape that's not going to let us go beyond the boundary of these two inside and outside edges. This is 3/32 of an inch wide, and I'm working with an 1/8 inch router bit today, so even that won't fit in there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this and subtract it from this big base shape here so that I get 2 outside paths instead of one big outside path and one little inside path here. So let's take both these, shapeshift those, take that, keep existing shapes again, make that shape. I can get rid now of the original rabbit, but I want to keep that overall outside shape. Now I've got my overall outside shape and another outside shape that's going to allow me to cut just that rabbit. I also have all the holes in here. So what's going on with the holes? They are still part of both of these shapes. So with this outside rabbit, I'm going to select all and take the holes out of that. Make that a shape. On this outside profile, I'm going to do the same thing that we did earlier, where I pick the holes out of it and turn them into a new shape while keeping the existing shapes. And then I'll do that again by shape-shifting this whole thing, selecting all, and making that a shape of its own. So now we have 3 groups here. We have this rabbit cut, we have this outside profile, and we have all 4 holes off on their own. Into plan mode, we're doing the same thing as we did before. Outside cut on the rabbit. Now this is an interesting one. The bottom of my panel of my drawer is a 1/4 inch deep, so I'll make this 0.26 inches deep on that one. This cut should go all the way through, so this will be 0.43 like we've done before. And these 4 holes, let's make these 0.375 so that we're sure that they're not going all the way through. And review. What's going on there? Ahaha, this is why we review. So these guys right here are currently online cuts. Let's make these inside. That looks way better. Cool. One last file. You guys are really champs for hanging on through this. This is a complicated one, I told you. Uh-oh, I built this in the curved box folder. Well, let me tell you how I made this base. The base here, as you might imagine, is just the shape-shifted profile of the inside of the ellipse, the inner ellipse, the side rectangle here, and the other side rectangle here. So I can draw those really quickly. 0.375 wide, 5.25 inches tall. Let's snap this over. Whoa. Let's snap this over here. Nice. And another one. Rectangle. 7.75 inches wide. 0.375 inches tall. Okay. We've got that one right here. Now let's make that ellipse. Ellipse is going to go anchored at 0, 0. And we're going to drag it up to the top. And we're going to drag it off to the side. And then we're going to duplicate it in place. And then we're going to take that and subtract 3/8 from each side. And we're going to get 14 and 9 instead of 14 3/4 and 9 3/4. And bam, here's the shape, the base shape of the base. Now, the interesting thing about this is that you're going to make sure that you offset the cut for this base on origin by whatever offset you need to fit inside of the grooves at the bottom of the box, plus a little bit of room for expansion. So I offset this by 1/16 of an inch all the way around. Positive offset leaves more material on origin. Whew! Okay, let's look at that stuff in real life here. Here's the base. Here's the base. Here's the box. We got the base. Does this look familiar now? Let's show this off on the side camera here. I think we'll get a little bit more detail. What do you think about that? We got that base. We got that inside shape. We've got these 2 ellipses. We've got our side panels with box joints. Yeah, this is all really coming together. Okay, I want to let you guys digest all of that for a minute because I know this computer stuff can be tiring. We just want to get in the shop and make parts with wood. But how else are you going to make these curved parts like this without a little bit of design? And I think 15 minutes of design is about the best you can do for curved drawers like this. But while that digests, we've got 2 things. This is the middle of the show, so it's time to take a breather and answer a poll question that gets you entered to that giveaway to win a set of Brusso L23 hinges, which we're using in this cabinet that we're working on. And then also something else, some shaper accessory. I really have to decide on that before the end of the show. So the poll question today is, what other digital design software do you use besides Studio? We're curious. We've been working a lot on shortcuts recently. It's really helpful to know what shortcuts people are used to. Helpful to know what features people are used to. What other digital design software do you use other than Studio? Microsoft Paint? And while that's up, we're going to run our shop tour. I've got a couple of announcements, but we're going to save them for the Q&A on this one because these are top secret announcements for live viewers only. So let's roll that shop tour. This one's from Brett. And it's a really cool little shop in a garage, beautifully organized. Let's roll the tape.
Welcome to Washington State. Here I share a 2-car garage. To use, half of it is my workshop. To use this garage, I had to build a wall between the two sides. That sliding door really does help. On that door, I keep my Bessie clamps and my woodpecker measuring tools. On this wall, I have hardware supplies, trusty old toolbox, drill holders and chargers, supply stands, and then coming out of that corner, I have a Fez tool vacuum and a Laguna bandsaw. Don't have too many Fez tools, but that vacuum really does a great job. Behind the bandsaw is my material storage. A couple racks against the wall for boards and a cart that hinged in the back to pivot out and allow me to slide in sheet goods. Against this wall, I have a router table that I got the plans from New Yankee Workshop about 20 years ago. An original woodpecker router lift. Tools, router bits, so on and so forth. And maybe supplies for when I'm not working with power tools. Over here we have a flip-top tool stand, osculating spindle sander, and my planer down below. Bessie clamps. Over here we have the drill press. I have a saw stop table saw. Over here is my blade storage. That was a nice little project. Against the big door in the back, I got Fez tool track, some signs I've acquired over the years, material cabinet, typical stuff, finishes, glues, some Fez tool. It's where I store the shaper, origin. As you wrap around, you have the joiner and chop saw. There's a tarp there in the wall so that it can be rolled up to get access to the ladders on the backside. Because it's such a small space, I've resorted to hang some tools from the ceiling. Over here's the primary work table. And that's where I work with the Shaper Origin. Thank you very much for allowing me to share my shop today.
Thanks, Brett. I really love that ceiling storage. I'm going to have to ask Jake to lower the ceilings in here so that we can get that going. Or we need a scissor lift. Maybe that would be more fun. So I have been sanding these little pieces that I pulled out of the board that I was working on. We can look at that on the overhead cam again. You can see all that stuff's gone now. They look like this. And these are going to look probably a lot more familiar, or like they make a lot more sense to you now that you've seen that studio demonstration on how they were built. we have one more piece to cut, and it's this last guy up here. Now, if we go over to origin, you can see this is going to be the one with the holes, with the rabbet, with the outside cut. And I want to take the time to walk through this cut super slowly in nice even steps, because with the first one we kind of breeze through it. With the second one we got to catch up a little bit and talk about the cut settings so that everybody knows what they're doing at home. Now, if we look at this, one thing that I recommend whenever you're cutting with origin, and especially when you're cutting small parts, is to make sure that you cut these inside features first. On this piece, that's going to be these holes. We're going to helix them. Let's turn that on right there. And now one thing that you'll notice right here is I've got this little warning icon that says, hey, you're cutting way too deep on these. Let's look at that. Remember, the encoded depth on these is 0.375 inches because my parts are 0.415 total, and I don't want to go all the way through them on the top and bottom parts. So let's look at our settings. 0.375 inch depth. Auto pass is off because I'm using helix mode here. This is going to be an inside cut. No offset because I know that these dowels are going to fit with no offset. I tested one earlier. 1/8 inch router bit. I already Z-touched it before the show. And in the speeds here, this is an interesting one. I cranked the speeds for this to the maximum allowable plunge speed and the highest default auto speed. That's because when you're helixing these holes, all you need to do is hang on for dear life. The tool's going to do all the cutting for you. When I say hang on for dear life, that's more relevant when you're talking about bigger holes. With this little 1/8 inch router bit cutting a 3/16 hole, you're not going to feel a thing hardly. So let's zip out these holes. They're going to be really quick. Okay, now the next thing is a little tricky. How do I decide whether I cut the rabbet first or the outside cut? So let's look at what would happen if I did one or the other of these first. So we're working up here. Now, let's take a look at this. If I cut the outside cut first, most of the way down, not all the way through because we don't want to break this part free, and then cut the rabbet, I really like the looks of that because the rabbet is also going to be a conventional cut cutting against the direction of the spin of the router bit. If I cut the rabbet first and then come back to cut the outside cut, when I'm cutting in this free zone, I'll be actually climb cutting because the material on the inside of that cut will have been removed, and so the router is going to want to pull away from me, which is something that we don't want. So what I'm going to do is cut this outside cut down to the 0.375 inches that we've been doing. Then I'll come in and cut my rabbet down to the 0.26 inches that I have set to give us just enough clearance for the base of the drawer. And then I'll come back to this outside cut and cut the whole thing free all the way around. And we'll pause in between each of these to talk about this. Now, again, when I'm cutting this outside cut, I am going to go down to 0.375 inches. When I turn auto pass on, it is going to automatically update that to my encoded depth. So let's go ahead and turn this back down to 0.375. That's okay. It is going to be an outside cut. I'm doing a roughing and finishing pass with this like I did earlier, so let's set this to 0.03. 1/8 inch router bit, already Z-touched, and for safety's sake, I'm going to turn these speeds back down to the defaults. Okay, perfect. Oh, and you know what? The other thing that I did for the first piece that I really do actually want to do here is go ahead and just give these corners a little bit of help. So I'm going to do that first. That was just relieving those corners so that we can help eliminate tear out. Let's go back to the settings that we had earlier. We're going to turn auto pass on. We're going to put that 0.03 inch offset back on there. And let's bring this down to 0.375 inches and cut out this outer profile most of the way through. Okay, there's that first cut. Now I want to come in and do the rabbit like we talked about. And let's see, do I need a roughing and a finishing pass for this? I'm going to turn auto pass off. We do only want to cut this to, this says 0.25. I'm going to make it 0.26 inches just to give the base of my drawer a little breathing room. And if we take this offset off, it looks like it does actually cut everything. So what I'm looking at here is making sure that the gray area that represents the area that I'm going to cut with this bit comes all the way out to the blue cut history where I've cut all the way around. And this does make sense. It adds up 3 30 seconds plus another 30-second or so, which is that 0.03 inch offset that we used. That all adds up to make sure that that is exactly approximately the same width. So let's come in here, and all we need to do is just trim in this rabbit here. Doesn't have to be the smoothest cut even. We're just going to do one finishing pass with this because it's going to be hidden. That looks awesome. I'm really happy with that. Now let's go ahead and cut this outside cut. And this is going to be the last cut of the show. So if you have any questions, now's the time to really make sure that you get those in the comments. We're up here. We're working on this one. There we go. We're on this last cut outside. That's going to cut down to 0.43 inches with no offset. And I want to make sure that I start and end on this corner that I've already pre-drilled here. So here we go. And it's important to be careful with these when you're breaking them free, because they are small, delicate parts at this point before they're glued together. But wow, that looks really cool. So we've got that nice rabbit in there. We've got these locating holes all the way around. Nice crisp corners. This is going to make a nice little box jointed part. Let's clean this up and assemble it, and then that's a wrap, and we can answer some questions. Looks like we've got a couple of really good ones so far. 5 questions in the queue. Ted usually scrounges up a bunch more while we're answering them. That's his time to go search for the questions instead of answering them in the chat himself. But yeah, let me know what you guys thought of this project. I'm really interested to hear whether this is something you would even do at home, because I had never done one of these curved drawers in my 4 years of woodworking with Shaper, even though they've always, let's show this on the Origin cam here. Yeah, just sanding this off. Even though they've always been interesting to me, they seemed a little unapproachable. But now that we've got the process figured out with Studio, I think I'm going to be doing more of these. Yeah, there we go. Nice. Okay, let's put this all together. I've spread out across the bench here. I think this will be a good spot. All right, we got all this stuff over here. Want to make sure that we alternate. Actually, what about over here? Can we see this on the camera? Yeah, let's do that. Okay, nice. Got that. I've got my pegs that have been hiding down here for the whole show. These are 3/16 inch maple dowels. And I am not going to glue this together right now, but you could imagine how it would go together. So we just got a long one. Let's do a short one. Oh yeah, there we go. Nice, we got a short. Now let's do another long. I think 4 is the perfect number. 5 was a little difficult to line up. 4 is going together really easily. And you want to make the glue up as easy as possible for this. This one had just a tiny little bit of chip out, so I would probably cut another one of those if I were doing this again. But good enough for TV. You know, they never actually try the turkeys on the cooking shows. All right. There we go. That is a curved drawer panel right there. There's the bottom. Can you see the rabbit on that one? Yeah, check that out. So we got a couple more parts over here. We have the base here. That's just going to slide in like so. There we go. And then the bottom, or the side that is, this guy goes right here. Oh yeah. And this guy, I have my corners marked for best possible alignment. That guy goes right there. And there's a drawer box. Let's show this off. Yeah, this camera is so much better. There we go. So one thing I did to help with the glue up on this, to help keep these box joints nice and tight, because this is a curved surface, is I went ahead and made a fixture like this one. I'm going to come back over to this camera again. This guy goes not quite all the way to these 2 corners over here. I better move this up so you guys can see. Let's do one of these. This fixture here is almost like the one that I used to cut the box joints on Workstation, but it actually doesn't extend all the way up to the box joints, so it really allows you to press this stuff together and let those box joints protrude a little bit so that you can close up all of these gaps, because it's really clamping that does all the work for you on that one, but you need a flat surface to clamp up against on the opposite side. So make yourself one of these, and then make yourself a cabinet with a curved drawer. One last thing that we didn't mention is, how do I cut the grooves in the panels, the side panels of these? Well, that's what this guy here is showing. These are 0.250 inch or 0.26 if you want to give it a little bit of wiggle room grooves up here. Now, the important thing that you want to note is that these are located from the top of the finger, because when you cut each of these fingers for the stacked lamination, this groove will also be located from the top of the finger. So you're going to want to move that up 0.415 inches. How did I arrive at this 0.415 inches for each finger of the box joint? Well, the total drawer box is 2.906 inches. And what's up with that? Well, it was nominally 3 inches, and then we took a little bit off the top and bottom for the pivots of these Brusso L23s. So that's how we arrived at 2.906. Divide that by 7, and you get 0.415. Okay, that's enough math for one day. Let's answer some origin questions. If you're watching this on YouTube after the fact, make sure to join us live for the next Shaper session. We do these every other Thursday. We do a demo. Sometimes they're really insane demos, like curved drawer boxes. Sometimes they're light, like making a sign for your friend who just had a kid, or cutting your first mortise and tenon with Origin. If you've got any topic requests, we're happy to hear them always. If we get a couple requests for something, we almost definitely do it. So anyway, thanks for watching, regardless of where you are tuned in from. And make sure to watch us live next Thursday on Shaper Sessions.